Much for joining us today. And before beginning the interview, I would like to share your brief biography with viewers. Mr. Merle Heinrich has dedicated his 60-year career to promoting global trade as the founder and executive chairman of Global Sources and as the chairman of the Heinrich Foundation. His work is driven by the belief that sustainable and mutually beneficial global trade can bring stability in international relations and growth. He established the Heinrich Foundation in 2012 as a contribution to his lifelong mission to introduce fresh thinking to advance global trade. In 1965, Mr. Heinrich obtained a graduate degree in international trade at Thunderbird School of Global Management. And he has received much recognition in his career. In 1996, the University of Nebraska awarded Mr. Heinrich an honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters. In 2010, Thunderbird School of Global Management awarded him an honorary degree of Doctor of International Law. And in 2015, Hong Kong Baptist University awarded him an honorary university fellowship. And in 2018, he received the Beta Gamma Sigma Entrepreneurial Achievement Award. Mr. Heinrich, I'm honored to have you here for Association for Foreign Correspondents in the United States to introduce you and discuss your view of global trade.
I'm delighted to be with you, Mumei.
Thank you. So first of all, what motivated you to create the Heinrich Foundation in 2012? What was the original purpose of the activity? Could you tell us your personal story behind it?
Well, first, the objective was to ensure that there was a way forward in addressing sustainable trade and promoting sustainable trade. Sustainable trade, in order to be sustainable, has to be mutually beneficial. And the mutual benefit part of it is what we see in today's world as such a critical element of cross-border trade and, of course, of the success and the development of economics right today. So the purpose and the mission and the objective of the foundation has been to advance sustainable trade. Official.
Okay. And after graduating in 1966, you worked to promote trade in Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. And in 1970, you launched the Hong Kong-based media group, Asian Sources. Now it's called Global Sources, to connect Asian manufacturers and Western buyers. Why did you get to focus on Asian countries to promote trade?
Well, first, after graduating from Thunderbird, I had, and very fortunately, a job offer with a company in Japan called East Asia Publishing Company that was publishing a journal called The Importer that promoted product and manufactured merchandise from Japan. I was hired to grow that same business in Taiwan and Southeast Asia. So I spent the next few years developing the business with manufacturers in these countries. So I had the opportunity, very fortunately, to see and to better understand the benefits of trade, both the positive and the negative benefits of trade. And those benefits, of course, was and primarily in poverty alleviation. It improved educational facilities. It improved the engagement with buyers and sellers. And so that there was a societal aspect of it, which was, for me, really very encouraging. And I was able to do that literally from Japan to Pakistan. And I was fortunate enough to be able to meet the individual manufacturers that were engaged. And I must say that was very educational. And I became quite engrossed in the benefits of trade. And so as an outcome of that, and as I reached retirement, I decided that I wish to continue my contribution to developing sustainable trade.
You have gotten involved with global trade for more than 4 decades. How has the situation of global trade changed and improved over those years? Did you need to change the goal of your organization accordingly, considering the change of global trade scene?
Oh, it changed dramatically. So when I first came to Asia in 1965, the primary and the largest single manufacturer in Asia was Japan. South Korea was in its early stages of development. Taiwan was engaged and also Hong Kong started, but only in a very early phase of development. And so from the time I arrived in 65 to today, it has changed so dramatically that it's totally unrecognizable. You had a change in the type of product and the merchandise. When I first went to Taiwan, there were literally auctions on the street, and they were basically selling carpets and they were selling produce that was grown, mushrooms being one, out of Taiwan. And today, they're the largest and most important chip manufacturing region in the world. So it has went from everything from totally labor intensive and craft kind of businesses in many of these countries to the most sophisticated products available. We, in the publishing world, we had to change our product many times. We started with a general publication, which was part of the craft industry, and we participated in the early stage of electronics. I think that the most sophisticated product out of Hong Kong when I first arrived was a 6-transistor radio. And so you can appreciate the changes that have been made. Now, not only did the product change and the origin and the supply chains change dramatically, but the countries that were participating changed as well. And so, as you will well recall, it was Japan and South Korea first, then it was the Four Dragons, and the Four Dragons participated in the export development. All of them benefited dramatically, economically, and as I said, socially. So it was very impressive to me, and I was very influenced by this development. Each country had different focus, different priorities in participation. So this was part of that development.
How has the technological innovation been impacting the global trade? As you mentioned, that product has been changed. You created Asian sources in 1970s, which was way before internet age. How did you build up marketing strategy to promote products in Asia to Western countries in those days?
Well, of course, we started in our promotional activity. We started with print, and then you may not recall, but there was the facsimile. So we also promoted products using the facsimile. We were the first adopters of the internet in 68, 69. We were the first platform that promoted exports from Asia, and we segregated that promotional work by product because we appreciated the importance of specificity and product selection. But technology has certainly changed the trading world dramatically. And it's changed it really in 3 basic ways. First and foremost, of course, is simply the ability to communicate in almost immediately. Absolutely, it is as we are communicating here in an instantaneous way. So that has benefited trade and cross-border buying and selling immensely. The second change in technology has been simply the ability to supply content, massive amounts of content, which has contributed to all sorts of knowledge, all sorts of supply chain activity, because when you have that kind of content and you have major supply chains, the data in achieving an export product is substantial. Being able to have that all available online at any one time and having it available immediately is incredibly important. The third element of technology that has and is continuing to evolve is simply the power of processing. So you can have all of the data and you can have it available, but if you don't have the processing power to manage or utilize it like you need in artificial intelligence, AI, or you need it in 3D, or you need it to process all sorts of things, it is important. So today, the availability of processing is now much larger and much more profuse than it has ever been. So this has been an incredibly important contribution to trade.
Now we have digital trade, which was developed all over the world. How is this new technology impacting global trade?
Well, as I said, all of the three elements which I've mentioned have had and made a contribution. But the reality of it is that it's in its early stages, and some of it is in the early stages because there are not adequate standards. The WTO has been working on the data, or open door, open window, for about 20 some years. And it has been only recently where you have seen digital trade agreements. And an example of that is the digital trade agreements between Singapore and Australia and Singapore and New Zealand. So Singapore has been actually very advanced in extending data trade facilitation, right, on certain documents. So when you, specifically with large corporations, they will have their own framework and they will have their own structure and they'll have their own documents, etc. So that is well developed, but the area of the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises, that is in its early stage, and it's very important to keep the data open, keep it available, and to grow that value, because it does take a great deal of cost out of the process and the participation. Today, e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce has played a very, very important role. A role where product availability now is available almost any place in the world online, and that product can be quickly and easily shipped. And it is, and it's the choices. So we have been able to provide consumers worldwide with choices with which they would have never had before. Choices of product, choices of service, and that is really quite important. And will continue to grow. But the critical issue is going from the sellings of one and two or three items in an e-commerce environment to selling a container of product. And when you get into the containers, then you get into all the documentation that is related to the tariffs and the customs and proof of origin and the financial and insurance and shipping issues. So that is an area where it is more problematic and more of a challenge for sure. But it's being resolved. Only it's being resolved.
How about the contribution of digital currency? Some parts of the world doesn't have sufficient payment system, and by using the digital currency, mainly Bitcoin, they can do some trade by using those payment system. how do you see the current situation of this payment system developed in the world?
The digital payment systems are improving daily, and the volume now that is being put through digital payment systems like Wise and a number of other platforms is incredibly efficient, and it is incredibly competitive with banks. So you're seeing an increasing amount of digital payment services. And this is a growth area. We see it across the world. It will change. Now there's big differences between utilizing cryptocurrencies and using digital sovereign currencies as well, right? So if it is just simply a matter of digitally transferring a foreign currency, there are facilities for that. There are facilities for solving, I should say, paying transactions in various cryptocurrencies. And the cryptocurrencies, of course, are playing a big role in how the future of our metaverse universe will be.
The world is getting dominated by protectionism lately, and each country focuses on its own benefit more than before, especially it is true for the relationship between United States and China. In this world, is global trade really needed, or how can we do to protect our country's benefit at the same time to encourage the global trade?
Well, I think first of all, let's frame what is indeed cross-border trade today. Are cross-border enterprises where one country earns certain revenues with which they can spend on other products. And there's really four categories. There's the financial sector, which today is larger than it has ever been in the history of mankind. Here is the trading of currencies, the mergers and acquisitions and foreign direct investments, etc. That is a huge category, and that is part of the cross-border globalization process. The second category is in services. There's a huge amount of services. You can talk about advisory services, consulting services, you can talk about shipping services. There's a whole variety of services now that in part or in total are digitized. And one of those, of course, services is education, right? So now you have a huge amount of cross-border education. The third category, and probably is seen in more a historical context, is the import and export of merchandise. Merchandise is manufactured in one country and then shipped to others. And along with the merchandise is commodity. It's a commodity merchandise sector. Okay. The fourth category, which is typically not considered as part of cross-border trade, but it is certainly one where countries earn foreign revenue, is tourism and cross-border transport of people interested in whatever it may, entertainment, education, whatever that may be. Now, if we look back over the course of the last 50 years, all four of these sectors have just exploded. We have more globalization today than what we have ever had before. The issues between the United States and China are real. There's a cost factor involved, but trade continues. It is not as if trade has been terminated in any way. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, China is exporting more today to the United States than they've ever exported before. And the United States is also exporting a lot to China. Now, what has happened is that because there has been this problem or spoke to problem, many companies are looking to change their sources, changing their supply chains and developing it. But because of the pandemic in part, there's a huge amount of pent up demand. So between this which you would call a trade strife, and the pandemic, it has put a great deal of pressure on supply chains. But in fact, when we look at, yes, there are shortages. And yes, there has been, as a result of that, increases in costs, everything from the lumber and the building materials to things with which are more of a basic consumer need. That that is, my view, is not transitory. That there's going to be a increase in inflation for all of these products. And part of that inflation is not just in the commodity itself, but it is in the increase of labor, it's in the increase of transportation, and simply supply and demand. And that's the market. But I think um, we have to look at the reality of trade. Trade has done extremely well, and it has continued to grow.
Speaking of inflation, we have been in the past 10 years, maybe more than 10 years, we have been deflational world, not in only in the United States, but Japan especially. Do you think after this COVID pandemic and supply shortage, as you mentioned, we are heading for longer term inflation and, you know, each country's monetary policy regulators has to deal with this changing of the interest rate, I mean, changing of the financial world?
Uh, yes, I do think that we are going to see um, a increase in costs across most product and most services. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, of course, is just the monetary and fiscal policies that have been part of COVID-19 and then part of the 2008 recession. That looks like it will continue. We've never seen such low interest rates. So there's a lot more money available to chase a shortage of merchandise and a shortage of product. So that is, it's only inevitable that those prices are reflected in the retail sales and the retail prices. The other thing, of course, is simply that COVID-19 has created a great deal of pent up demand, and there have been, as I said earlier, there have been shortages within that supply chain, and because of some of the trade issues, i.e., one being computer chips, a shortage of computer chips throughout that supply chain, and now the importance of chips embedded in everything from our laptops, of course, and our cell phones to the auto industry, all of the IoT product. So there's a huge demand, and that demand will appear only to increase, not decrease. So I think that we can expect higher costs throughout that supply chain for some time to come. And yes, some of the prices will come down. You look at lumber. Lumber will, for housing, will spike and retreat, but I think it will stabilize at a higher price point, and that's true of a lot of commodities that we're looking at.
So I guess we're gonna see higher interest rate in the next maybe few years or over years. That might affect financial activities, the trade, those manufacturers and trading companies for their funding. How do you expect those interest rate environment will impact the global trade?
Okay. Well, interest rates will of course impact everything from the stock market to the bond market, and certainly it will increase the costs of manufacturing. And all of that ultimately will have to be passed through the supply chain to the ultimate consumer. So and certainly there will be industries, because of increased interest rates, will fail. And so there's a very, very fine balancing act with which the Federal Reserve and other central banks need to deal with to ensure that we have more, that we sustain our sustainability, but at the same time improve the return on the on savings and the financial services.
In addition to the technology, ESG is also playing a huge role in the business world right now. How has it been impacting the global trade?
Yes. So yes, and one certainly can say that the increase in globalization has contributed in a positive, but a negative way, in terms of enhanced transportation requirements. And as we know, transportation utilizes the largest portion of our oil. And of course, there's a carbon factor that is associated with that, and with chemicals and with plastics. So globalization and the increase of world demand and what have you have certainly impacted our environment. Now, the struggle, of course, is we're sort of in the middle of the blame game. Everybody's blaming someone else for the situation and the Earth warming effect that it has had. The truth of this is that cost ultimately needs to be incorporated in the respective product or the respective service and charged accordingly. And so it's only at that point somewhat equality of costs. And that has yet to be achieved. It's not achieved in terms of, and in part in trade, it is not reflected either. So there's a carbon factor that should be, in my view, better distributed through the trading mechanism. There should be a specific reference to the consumption and the cost of carbon.
I understand that your alma mater, American Institute of Foreign Trade, now called the Thunderbird School of Graduate Management, was founded on and continues to espouse the principle that borders frequented by trade seldom need soldiers. There are so many conflicts in many countries in the world. How do you expect the global trade can play a role of peaceful relationship between regions in conflict?
Well, you can't have the sustainability of development without peace. And you can't have peace without sustainable development. So ultimately, and this was basically a quote from a chap called Cordell Hull, and he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1947. And he was also very much involved in setting up the original GATT, with which preceded the WTO. And I do take that to heart. It is an essential. Trade is not going to, let's say, destroy or would postpone. There can certainly be trade and there can be war, but hopefully that dependencies that are brought about by cross-border trade will deflect or defer or diminish or permanently postpone the prospect of war, because there are no winners in a conflict, in a war, or in a conflict of that type. In today's world, there are absolutely no winners. So it is, in my view, it is absolutely essential to do everything that we can to avoid that consequence. And our role at the foundation is trying to move forward the sustainable trade and mutually beneficial sustainable trade. And that is the whole point of our exercise.
From 50 years from now, how do you expect the global trade will be changed? Do you have a vision on that?
Well, change it shall. There will be change. But global trade has been part of our civilization from the very beginning of our civil. We've been essentially traders. We've traded commodity, we've traded shells, we've traded everything that you can possibly imagine. So there's no question in my mind that people will wish to trade, and that we have seen the growth of trade in proportions and dimensions in the last 50 years that has never been seen before. And there has been huge benefits, massive benefits across the globe. Yes, there have been negative impacts, but the positive impacts far, far outweigh the negative aspects of it. So I think that that will continue. I think it will continue for all the right reasons, and hopefully we will be able, through good leadership, diminish or minimize those negative aspects of trade. So I foresee, yes, trade will continue. It will continue to grow. And yes, for sure, it will change. There are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. There's going to be fortunes that will be made and fortunes that will be lost.
Speaking of fortune, my colleague Thanos would like me to ask you this question. What is a secret of successful business?
To enjoy what you do, to really, and be passionate, and be interested, and be engaged, and be involved in what you do. I've never been engaged simply because of the monetary aspects of business. If I had been, I probably would have been doing something else. But I've enjoyed trade. I've enjoyed working with companies. I've enjoyed what I've been involved in, and that for me is the success.
Well, Mr. Heinrich, thank you very much for your time. It's been an honor and share your view. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.